Hey, good morning, Grace Church family. So good to be with you again this morning. Thanks for taking the time to join us for another staff devotional on a beautiful summer morning. It's so good to be able to just be able to meet together again here at church. We're allowed to meet in person again, and we're excited about that. We had a really great outdoor service on Sunday with a baptism as well, and it was so good to see so many people again coming out to church in person. And we're also grateful for the technology that even though we were outside, we were able to still live stream the service to be able to then broadcast that to people that were not able to join us. Well, for my devotional this morning, I wanted to just focus on a verse that really hit me as I have been reading through the Old Testament for my daily devotions, as I've mentioned before. And I was in the book of Deuteronomy. And there's this one verse that really stood out to me, and let me just read it. It's Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2. Listen to this verse. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Now that might be kind of a bizarre verse to base a whole devotional on, but let me just share a little bit about why that struck me. I don't know about you, but whenever I think of the nation of Israel traveling through the wilderness, on their way from Egypt, where God had delivered them from slavery, onto the promised land, I think of 2 million people walking through the wilderness on their way to the promised land, that it was such a vast group of people in a vast area that no wonder it took so long because of all these great distances. And then I read this verse in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2, and the reality just struck me that once God had given his law to the people of Israel there at the foot of Mount Sinai and said, now it's time to go to the promised land, they were only 11 days away from its border. 11 days. And yet, it ultimately took them 40 years before they finally entered the promised land. Why did that happen? Well, I think you know the story. Unfortunately, it was because they were stubborn, disobedient, complaining, grumbling people that were just outright rebellious against God. Wow. That's quite an indictment. You know, they'd spent a year at the foot of Mount Sinai receiving the law of the Lord, learning how to live in obedience to him, learning how to worship him properly. And God was preparing them to go into the promised land. And then God said, it's time to go. It's time to receive this wonderful inheritance that I had promised to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. For centuries now, the promised land was finally in front of them. But the people chose to reject God's promise because they were afraid. They were afraid to go into a land that was filled with uncertainties and risks, and they just did not have confidence in being able to enter that land and take possession of it. And so they said to God, no, thank you. We'd rather go back to the land of Egypt and go back to our life of slavery than to move forward into the unknown under God's protection, is essentially what they were saying. And it cost them 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. You know, it's easy for us to criticize the Israelites. We have the privilege of hindsight, and so we could see how ridiculous it was for them to be afraid, or how foolish it was not to trust God to be able to overcome the potential challenges that laid ahead for them. But how often do we actually do the same thing? God promises to give us blessings when we obey him. God promises to care for our needs. God promises to give us wisdom when we face uncertainties and challenges. God promises to go before us and lead us wherever he directs us, to guide us, to overcome those risks and uncertainties that lay ahead for us. But sometimes we just still choose to stay put, to stand still, to not move forward, to dwell on the past and want to go back to a life that's much less ideal for us because it's more familiar to us. But you see, God is calling us to trust him, to move forward, to follow him wherever he leads us with courage and with boldness. And so my question is, what uncertainties lie ahead for you? What is God calling you to trust him with as he directs you forward into perhaps some unknown territory? My encouragement is, don't hold back. Don't be afraid of the challenges that lay ahead. Don't be afraid of change. Don't think that things were better the way they were before, or things are better the way they are now, because when God calls you, he's got something better in store for you down the road, something greater that's waiting for you, some opportunities that lie ahead for you to be able to serve him, to further his kingdom, to do things that are so great because he equips you to do them and provides everything you need. You know, that's true for us here at Grace Church as well. We've got a new senior pastor coming soon in the fall. And that means, of course, there are going to be some unknowns and uncertainties ahead for us as a church, but God has brought us to this point. He has led us here to the edge of something new and something great, and now we need to trust him. Trust him to continue to do what he started doing already, which is guiding us and leading us and directing us forward into these new exciting times that lay ahead for us as a church family. So let's trust God today and in the weeks and in the months to come, and be obedient to his call on our lives to follow him where he leads us. And that's true for us as a Grace Church family, but it's true for you too as an individual. Wherever God is leading you, trust him. Trust him with the uncertainties and move ahead in confidence, knowing that God is faithful. Well, I hope that's a blessing to you this week. And so we'll again see you next time with our other next staff devotional. Have a wonderful week and enjoy this beautiful weather. God's blessing to you.